Welcome everyone. Welcome to week 2 of the APAC Groundbreakers Tour held by APAC OUC. It's been a massive first week, massive second week coming up. All up, we're going to have nearly 180 sessions, over 120 speakers, and we've also got the workshops as well. So don't forget, the whole thing is free. You can register to as many sessions as you like, and even if you double up, they can be recorded and you'll be able to view them on replay at any time. They're there for 2 weeks after the initial session, so make sure you get onto them and check them all out. Let me flick to the sponsors slide. Obviously, thanks to all the user groups that are participating in Java user groups. Without the sponsors, and particularly Oracle Groundbreakers and CloudDB, we don't get these things moving at all. So thanks to our sponsors. Today, a good friend of mine, Sandesh Rao, will be giving us some awesome stuff on the autonomous database. Sandesh is one of the great speakers around the community, tours all over the world, back in the days when we could actually tour. But obviously, if you have any questions, just throw them in the Q&A session and we'll cover them throughout the talk, or we'll get to them after the talk. But without any further ado, I'll hand over to Sandesh.
All right, Connor. Thank you so much, buddy. All right, give me a second. I'm just going to share my screen. All right, are we good? Sweet.
Good to go.
All right, let me just get this here. All right, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, folks. Wherever you're joining from, this starts off another week of some amazing sessions in knowledge. I'm just one of the sessions. There are actually a whole bunch of other cool speakers that are going to be presenting, so please do check them out. This is definitely one of the best conferences that I've had a chance to physically attend in the past. And these sessions are pretty cool as well. The most common questions I get: how do I connect with you? Where do I get this presentation from? And how can I follow up and ask any further questions that can't be covered during this presentation? And all of these are basically on this slide. So this slide is the only slide. You need to take a picture, a screenshot, or whatever actually is your favorite method of capturing this information, because once this thing is complete, it will be available on the APAC OUC site, but also it will be available on my SlideShare. So that's what this presentation is. My name is Sandesh. I won't spend a lot of time introducing myself, but I basically have been in Oracle forever. It's been 20 years. Done a whole bunch of stuff from databases to Dataguard to high availability to RAC. And now I'm working on AI and AI ops related technologies. One reason for doing this presentation is, before, pre-COVID, when we used to travel a lot, I used to actually help conduct labs along with Connor and a whole bunch of other folks. And one thing we used to notice is the same questions keep coming up again and again and again. It's like, how do I do this? How do I do that? And then we would go through with the users and we'd find either a workaround or a method or something or the other to do this. So then I was like, this is a pretty cool piece of knowledge, and we need to take some of this stuff and kind of make a presentation out of it, so that if you are a guy or a gal who's trying to figure this out for the first time, and you've got no ideas what are the major things you can do with this service, this is a good 45-minute presentation. It's going to give you an introduction. Of course, this is a vast topic, and there's going to be a lot more presentations on this, but I'll give you these 20 questions, and we're trying to cover as many of these as we can in the next 45 minutes, all right? So first one is, a lot of people are like, how do I get started with the free tier? And remember this, there's always a free tier. This allows developers to learn, do the stuff. It's an unlimited amount of time, the accounts don't expire, and it gives you full functionality of the autonomous database, as well as you can run a bunch of compute VMs. You can attach block storage, object storage, as well as you can use the load balancer. There's a certain amount of traffic that you can actually send. And all of these are basically free as part of this service. You don't, they take your credit card just to verify who you are, but they don't charge it. So you'll see a $1 charge that kind of reverses after a while, just to verify that, no fake bots are creating accounts. But this is kind of what the free tier gives you. I'm not going to read out all this, but basically a bunch of computes, block volumes, load balancers, and a certain amount of data that you can actually send in and out, which is pretty cool for just getting started and getting your feet wet in this if you haven't had a chance. The usual average time to get started on this whole thing is about 10 to 15 minutes. Once you create your account, then you get back a notification. Once you accept the notification and sign in, and then all these resources are actually available to you. So that's the free tier. And There are two different options to basically create either an ADW or an ADP database. And there's an option that basically says always free eligible. So you can stick to anything that says always free if you basically do not want to pay anything for this. And again, there's always a toggle that says only show the always free configurations because you don't want to see any paid configurations. Anytime you try to use something that basically requires you to pay or requires you to have a license or pay as you go, it will notify you that you're switching from the free tier to the paid tier. So you can basically use this service without paying anything, without worrying about your stuff that's going to be expiring or not. And you can create all these autonomous databases and everything. Most of the options I'm talking about right now can be leveraged on the free ADB itself. I did want to mention that Oracle Machine Learning, Spatial, and Graph are all these options as of the end of last year are available for free. So when you create these database instances, all of these options can be accessed directly from the database instances. The second tip, how do you get started with Oracle Machine Learning? So Oracle Machine Learning is an option that's actually available as part of the autonomous database. Now, some of the most important algorithms are in the categories of classification, regression, attribute importance, as well as clustering and anomaly detection. A lot of these algorithms are actually available as part of the database, as part of what we used to call before as the data mining option. Now it's the Oracle Machine Learning option. And we keep adding more and more algorithms with every new database release that basically comes up. Not just the actual data, not just the actual algorithms in the database, but we have a complete package. It's called DBMS data mining that not just allows you to build a model, create your own testing and training sets, run entire use cases within the database, but the OML feature also allows you to get an access to a bunch of notebooks. You can basically create some Zeppelin notebooks and you can play with these Zeppelin notebooks and you can do all sorts of cool stuff with them, build reports, play with different kinds of visualizations. So it's a really cool method to basically go from becoming a database developer or a DBA to a data scientist, where you're just not writing reports and kind of doing ETL kind of activity, but you kind of move to actually taking your data to a completely next level. Whether you want to do modeling, evaluation, you want to see how your models perform, you can do all sorts of interesting things with this. Now, these screens keep changing, so I don't kind of bother changing these things in my slide every time because fundamentally the screens look the same, but the colors change, I think placement of the items change, but the fundamental remains the same. You go to your service console, you create a user. Once this user is created, it'll ask you for an email address and it sends out this thing in an email, and you can go basically and reset your email and username password. So in the service console, there's an option here in administration, which is called Manage Oracle ML Users. The Manage Oracle ML Users allows the autonomous DB user to create ML users. So basically think of it this way. I'm a DBA. I have a bunch of developers who want to access my autonomous database, but I don't want to give them full access to the database. So I want to give them access to a schema and a bunch of ML related tools and algorithms on top of that schema. So I create these ML users. That's why this user is different from the actual ADW user. That's the person that that's me, that's created this account. And I create these Oracle ML users, which will be the data scientists that will be actually operating on my schema. They will only have access to what they need for actually doing stuff in that schema. And that's why this Oracle ML users exists. So once I create the user, I put the email address of the user, they get an email saying, hey, here's what you're supposed to do, and you can reset your own password. Once they log in, okay, into their account, they can sign in and they can see a couple of things. They can run SQL statements. They can look at notebooks where they can do visualization as well as use algorithms. They can create their own SQL scripts. They can import JSON files of existing notebooks that are already available out there. You can see how many notebooks you have, what jobs you have run, how many AutoML algorithms that you are basically running through, as well as check the gallery to see existing set of notebooks that people have already created based on modeling that you can use for your use cases without actually having to start from scratch. So here's a couple of things that you can do as part of this OML option. Now, I won't go through details of this because there are many, many sessions that will actually cover how do you use OML, and particularly of interest are Charlie Berger's session, there's Heli Helskaho is actually also covering some sessions, and there's Edelweiss Kammerman also is covering some sessions. So there's a lot of people covering these in more details, and their sessions will be useful to attend. So here's a simple example of how you can do a a simple statistical, in this case, it's a t-test to find out when you're searching for men versus women, what do they buy? And in which items do they significantly differ in their purchases? It's a simple p-value test. And all I need to do is use this function called stats-t-test indep-u to basically find the two-sided p-value. Forget what all this means. I'm just telling you that you have a statistical function. And if the goal for you is to basically find average purchase amounts between men and women and they're grouped by income levels where they differ significantly, that's the SQL that you need to write. And that's it. So all these statistical functions are basically available as that. The same thing, you can actually build an attribute importance model using PL SQL. So all these are available as part of ML. These are the templates that are available that you can create or you can reuse as part of your projects. So you don't have to start from scratch. You can actually reuse something that somebody else has already written. And this continuously keeps expanding or getting added to with subsequent versions of the autonomous database release. We're also coming up with this thing called AutoML. And AutoML basically allows you to reduce the number of features and automatically find which is the appropriate algorithm for you and whatever hyperparameters that you need to tune. So basically, you don't have to be a machine learning expert in order to use this. And the best part is when you're looking at the user interface, this is the new user interface, where it will actually show you the importance, the automated attribute importance as part of this exercise. So this is basically allowing people that have no ideas about ML to be able to leverage ML. That's what all of this is part of the OML option under the autonomous database. These are the notebooks. We'll go to the third one, which is basically Oracle OCI or Resource Manager. And there's something called reference architecture patterns. Now, everybody is familiar with Terraform, which is basically a tool by HashiCorp to create an infrastructure setup. So there's a big difference between, say, Terraform and something like a script or something else that you can use to stand up your setup, or Docker, or all of these kind of things. The Terraform script is an end-to-end configuration stand-up script. It knows the dependencies between the resources, and it only knows what's in its configuration file. And there are two basic steps. One is you verify your configuration and then you apply it. When you apply it, the Terraform utility basically creates a file called terraform.tfstate. And that contains the state of your configuration. For example, stand up 2 autonomous databases, a whole bunch of file systems, load balancers, web servers, connect all of these together with a bunch of object stores and a whole bunch of other things. The Terraform utility is going to go and create these. It's going to automatically find out the dependencies between these resources. For example, before I create the instance, I should create the object store, so because the dependencies, one is dependent on the other. So I should create the base resources first before I actually create the resources that come on top of it. Now, you can actually create an instance in OCI and you can stand up this stuff using, so OCI has a whole bunch of HashiCorp templates. So remember, there's 2 different languages. There's JSON and there's HashiCorp language, or HCL. My favorite is usually HCL because it's kind of more cleaner than JSON. JSON, you have to specify a lot more lines of stuff, even though JSON is more neutral in creation of this. Now, what is Oracle? What is this resource manager stuff? Now, Oracle's got something called resource manager in the database. This is not that. This is the OCI resource manager that allows you to basically create a configuration using Terraform. That's what this is. It's called stacks. So you go into resource manager, you pick stacks, and when you're inside a stack, you create a stack, and there's a whole bunch of options that show up. By default, you can create an ADW or ATP instance, but there's also this option here called departmental data warehousing. What that does is it creates an ADW instance along with an Oracle Analytics Cloud instance. Remember, there's a session that was actually done before on Oracle Analytics Cloud and how it works. And the Oracle Analytics Cloud can utilize the autonomous data warehouse to basically store its backend data, as well as ingest data from multiple flat files and sources in order to analyze it. But at the same time, it provides the capability to take everything and do a very clean way of organizing, analyzing, and applying a bunch of automated algorithms on top of data. That's what the Oracle Analytics Cloud is popular for. Now, there's a whole bunch of stuff that gets created underneath the covers. So you have to create VCNs, you have to create security lists, you have to connect all of these, you have to create the autonomous data warehouse, you have to take the connection templates, you have to copy them off to the analytics cloud, you have to authenticate, cross-authenticate, and configure this entire thing. Now, a lot of times people used to write blueprints on architectural configurations, right? So here's how you set up a rack instance. You need these machines, you need this shared storage, you need this, that. This is a simple way of using an Oracle template for Terraform and standing up this entire thing. So you could basically use your own Terraform templates, or you could use this. As an example, I've selected this departmental data warehousing configuration. Pardon, the screen is not as clear. The screenshots are not as clear in this. But basically what it does is after you enter a whole bunch of stuff, it shows you what the thing is, what is the configuration, what compartment this thing is in, and a whole bunch of data that's required for configuring this. Once you configure this and you say create, it will execute the Terraform configuration to stand up. So OCI Resource Manager is a way for creating configurations, storing existing configurations and images so that you can deploy them in other places, as well as creating your own customized Terraform templates and storing them. You can also use the object store to basically share your terraform.tf state files so that multiple people can make changes to the configuration without damaging the source of truth, which is basically the TF state file. So this is feature number 3. Feature number 4, by default, ADW or ATP instances used to have public endpoints. A lot of people do not like this because they don't want the database to be exposed to the internet. Now, there's a lot of security, there's a lot of encryption, there's all this stuff there, but just like it's a public IP. That's still annoying for a lot of people. So security, people who want security in a way where they have their own bastion hosts, where that's the only way to access their network. And then you get into your VCN and you use these peer-to-peer VCNs to connect to your database host. So you're using the bastion host as a proxy to access your database host, and you never put the IP address on the internet. We didn't have this capability until a couple of months ago. Now we do. So there's an option called Update Network Access. By default, this was the only option that was available, which is secure encrypted access from everywhere. Instead, I could switch to a VCN access and specify what my VCN is, what my tags are, and what my network security group is. There are 2 ways to define security in a VCN. One is like subnet based or security lists. Another one is called network security groups. The pros and cons between the two are the security list allows you to set up everything like a firewall rule on top of the subnet. So those rules apply to a subnet and all services that come into that subnet. But you can't make those rules extremely flexible in such a way that you allow something and you don't allow something. You have to make the rule extremely complex in order to do this. If I have a bunch of servers that need to have a common set of rules for some services, and I don't need those rules for some of the other services running on it, you will rely on something called network security groups, or NSGs. NSGs are a much more popular way of defining network security in OCI. So in this case, the person has configured a network security group that allows them to have limited access to the database via their VCN. So they connect to their VCN, and from their VCN, they can connect to the database. But externally, they cannot connect to their database. So that's what this thing allows. It allows the ability to do this. So by the way, you can do this when you're creating the database. You can do this after the database has been created, and you can edit and change it too. It's much easier to do it when you're creating the database though. All right. And once you create it, you will get the private endpoint URL as part of the configuration and the network security group that's created as part of the configuration. So this is a way to put your ADW instance no longer on the public internet, but configure it so that you can use peer-to-peer access or a DRG or any other method of connection or fast connect when you're connecting from your own private network to via some kind of provider to OCI in an encrypted fashion, and you don't want this on the public internet. So there's so many ways that this flexibility allows you to put the database in your own VCM and not access it from the public internet. Wallet rotations. By default, there are two kinds of wallets, an instance wallet and a regional wallet. The regional wallet allows you to basically connect to all instances in that region. The instance wallet allows you to only connect to that instance. If an instance wallet is rotated and invalidated, a regional wallet can still override it. So if I have the regional wallet, I can still connect to it. So regional wallets are flexible, but they're not as fine-grained as far as security is concerned. So if I want to throw somebody out, I have to invalidate the entire regional wallet by throwing everybody out. But if I have a per database wallet with instance wallet, then I can do this. Now, all of these have an option for auto rotation. So if you go to DB connection, and there's an option called rotation, there are OCI APIs for doing all of this. So you basically don't, you can use OCI CLI to actually run and rotate your wallets without actually having to log in and click on these buttons for all your DBs, right? So as you go, right, you're basically going to use the OCI Python utility a lot more, because you can script all of this stuff without actually having to connect and do all these GUIs are just for like playing around. You're creating a couple of instances and stuff like that. Once you start using OCI and the autonomous database to a much more larger scale, you're going to just click, 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 and keep going. So you rotate your wallet, and once the wallet is rotated, it basically tells you the status. All of once you complete this, all the existing wallets are basically invalidated. So in other words, I cannot use any of the old wallets to connect back to the instance. So I can set up this automatic rotation so that I can invalidate passwords. Think of it as your email where it says, hey, every 120 days you have to reset your password. So this is a cool security mechanism to enforce this. Partitions with external tables in cloud. Nothing new, but cooler ways of doing these things when you start moving from on-prem deployments where you're kind of used to seeing things on file systems versus, hey, so the cloud has three different kinds of ways, actually 4 different kinds of ways to store things, right? So one of them is the object store. Then there's the file system store. Then there's the block storage, and then there's the archive storage. There are 4 ways to do this. Block storage is more equipped for boot and data volumes that are actually connected to running instances, and they can be used for storing databases or whatever that you would like. The object store is the most infinitely scalable storage among all of these storages, because they're kind of like the object storage. It's built in such a way where it's robust. You can scale across as many regions as you can, and you have replication set up in this. So a lot of people, what they do is the most common thing to do is to upload files into the object store and create something called PAR URLs, or pre-authenticated rules. So these are like, think of it as, I upload something to Dropbox, right? I can say share and a link gets created. Now, anybody who has access to that link can basically access that data. But if you don't have access to that link, you cannot access that data. In this case, you can say anybody who has access to that link and is associated with a certain user or instance principal, that person can access this. So in other words, you don't have to enter username passwords every time in order to access this. So all the data in this case is stored outside the database. The files are in the object store buckets. And the database obviously does partition pruning and partition maintenance, just like how it does on external data files, as you would store on the file system. Simple way to do this: partition values, put the links and the files. These files are located on top of this. Now remember, you need to create this using DBMS Cloud, create external part table, where you specify the credentials. You have to configure the credentials to access this, by the way. That's a different step that's not specified here. Once the credentials are created and the credentials are specified, you have to use the JSON object identifier to specify the delimiter. So you're basically giving the SQL loader kind of parameters to find what files they are and what formats they are stored. And in this case, it says the record delimiter is a new line character, with the individual columns being delimited by commas. I can also do hybrid, where one of these partitions is basically inside the database and the others are outside. And I can also store this anywhere, whether it's the Oracle Object Store, whether it's S3 or Azure. I can make use of explicit authentication or pre-authenticated URIs. Pre-authenticated URIs are very popular. but it's pretty cool if you want to take some data, quickly bring it into the autonomous database without too much effort. Here's the syntax for this. The only difference being in the partition P3, you don't see the URL to the object store because that data is actually stored inside the database. How do you track activities? There's a lot of stuff that you will do inside the autonomous database that will go out and it'll execute as a job. Remember this, these are all REST APIs. So anything you execute will submit something, and then you need to go and query something that will go back and get the status from this thing. But once it gets the status back from this thing, you need to check the status and it will return an ID when it's complete saying this job with this details has completed. So in other words, you're doing multiple REST calls to submit, get the status of the job to find out if it's complete. Once it's complete, what is the details of the status that's complete? Instead of writing all this, there's something called a work request. And this is not just when you're creating autonomous database, but when you're using OCI in general. Look for work request when you submit something and you're looking for it to be completed and it comes back, right? So the work request thing is at the bottom in the resources. And in this case, I'm creating a database. I click on that work request. It will tell me it's initializing database, creating database, and all that sort of stuff. When it's completed, it goes green. That's it. Very simple. And any failures that happen, you will see them in the error messages on the bottom left-hand side. And any resources that this job is running on. Now remember this, when you run that job in the OCI resource manager, the associated resources will be at least 5 or 6 because there's a database, there's a VM, there's a connection coming from Analytics Cloud. In this case, it's simple. There's only one associated resource. So work request tracking is a very good way to find out where you are, what is happening to this thing, what are the background activities that are going on, and is it successful or is it failing or how long it's been stuck somewhere. That's what work request is for. And this works for everything in OCI. So it's not just specific to the autonomous database creation. When you have autonomous database, you know, the story goes that everybody's like, hey, geez, I don't have access to most of the stuff in the autonomous DB. How am I going to do performance tuning for it? There's performance monitoring metrics accessible from the OCI console. You can use metrics alarms, you can use notifications. So there's the metric service and there's the notification service. It uses 2 different services. And this gives you a certain set of charts on CPU utilization, memory, sessions, the most common stuff, the most usual suspects that you need. Now, these are the most basic set of service metrics that you need access to in order to do your troubleshooting without actually having to go deeper than that, okay? Now, there's more stuff if you want to go deeper than that, but 90% of your problems will be solved with this and these. How many failed logons, how many transaction counts, how many times are you parsing something, hot parsing something, stuff like that. So these metrics, by default, appear as part of the metrics option under the autonomous database. And the top 6 of these will be part of the service metric views. You can actually access this. There's a lot more than this, okay? You can add more dimensions. You can do all sorts of stuff. We'll see an example later when we're creating an alarm for something in the autonomous database. But there's a whole bunch of stuff. You pick a component, you pick OCI autonomous database, which is what you're looking at. And in this case, I'm looking at CPU or storage utilization. I can create an alarm on this particular query. And of course, that's just the basic metrics, right? So now, how do you go into details and creating an alarm on something like CPU utilization? That's tip number 9. So again, we go into this. Once I create an alarm, there are a couple of options I need to know. So first of all, what's the compartment and what's the metric namespace? I've already picked these 2. What's the metric name? CPU utilization. What's the interval? 1 minute. What is a statistic I want to collect? In that 1 minute, I want the mean statistic of that value. Then I go to the triggering rule. The triggering rule says if it's greater than 55%, now remember, this is a hypothetical example. It's not obviously practical, but I can say if the value is greater than 55 minutes, you trigger, so 55%, you trigger a delay for a minute, okay? And I'm already going to see where the current utilization is. Now, if you notice something, there's this thing called a query one at the bottom of that red box there, where it basically says CPU utilization is in brackets 1 minute, autonomous DB type is equal to ADW and dot mean. This is a pretty cool way of representing everything that I just went ahead and put in this entire box by writing this. And we'll talk a little bit about this syntax and what this actually means. I can go to the next level and create notifications. Now, what if it's greater than 55%, right? I need to do something about this. So I create a notification. In the notification, I create a subscription. So I can pick what I want. Sorry, I can pick what I want. And then I say, I want to pick high CPU utilization. And in that notification, hang on, I think I'm getting my screens mixed up here. Sorry, I think I've got a couple of missing slides here. So I've got high CPU utilization. Once I pick this, I enter the email address of what. Now, there are a couple of things you can do here. You can enter email addresses. You can enter pager duty numbers. You can do, there's all sorts of integration with third-party services where you can send out notifications. So remember this, there's the metrics service, which is the metrics and the alarms. Then there's the notification service, which basically sends out notifications as corresponding to that. These are for the OCI metrics that are available as part of the autonomous database. Now, you remember we saw this thing here, and I was like going to tell you, we'll talk a little bit about it as we go forward. Now here, this is called MQL, or the monitoring query language. It's very simple, actually. CPU utilization for a minute, pick the max value, and if it's greater than 80%, and I want all of it grouped by sum over that period of time. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to find the total number of hosts that have CPU utilization greater than 80%. Pretty simple. The second example, I can go by success rate every minute. 1 minute is the sampling interval. You group by the availability domain. And I want to find the mean that's less than 0.99. And I want to group them and aggregate them based on that. So group.sum. So I want to find how many availability domains have a success rate lower than 0.99. So this is everything I showed you in the last couple of screens. You can write queries like this in MQL. You don't have to go a click, 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 click. You can just write stuff like this. And it's pretty damn powerful. These are two simple examples of what you can do. Basically a metric, an interval, a dimension, which is basically like a name value pair. You can optionally specify a group function. You can directly apply a statistical function. It's really, really useful for setting up alarms. One thing I'll tell you this, when you're using any OCI service, get used to the command line. As much as you love the GUI, get used to the command line. There's a whole complete world out there of automation that you can actually set up, which you cannot do using the graphical user interface, that easily at least. So when you're doing things, when you're managing hundreds of databases on top of OCI, querying, writing this stuff in scripts, that's your friend. All right. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but basically when I started mentioning this, a lot of databases were in 18C. By now, most databases should have already migrated to 19. But I think for some paid customers, they still have the option to migrate. But I think by the end of this year, most of the autonomous instances will be on 19C. So if you're not on 19C, please upgrade to 19C. Then we go into Performance Hub. Performance Hub is an option that basically allows you to, troubleshoot, debug. I won't go through every screen. I put a lot of screens here so you can actually see what all you can do, but I will touch base on a couple of common points. First of all, Performance Hub, the top part, basically shows you the active sessions against three main statistics: the CPU consumption, the user IO, and which ones are currently in wait. Extremely important to start the triaging process. You can pick based on the time selector. You can, by default, it picks the last 60 minutes, but you can change the views to see something more historic. And everything is in dynamic chart form. So it's pretty cool. So we also have added this thing. This actually is, this is like, I think just a couple of months ago, where customers were complaining that they could not see things in the time zone that their browser was in. So we've added this now, where in addition to UTC, you can basically set the time zone, and you can see that in your time zone. including the timings that are there in the active session, which is very useful when you're debugging something. SQL monitor report. For every SQL, you can basically find out what's happening with that SQL. Is it executing? Is it completed? So basically green means it's completed, red means it's not complete, clock means it's queued, it's not complete yet. So there's a whole bunch of stuff at the bottom that you can see for SQL monitoring. When you know the SQL ID, the SQL plan hash. The plans, the users, the information of what's going on, the wait times, split, the read-write requests. When you click on the SQL ID, it goes further in, see the explained plans, the split of the time and wait based on IO, as well as how long it's been waiting, how long it's been waiting for a database, how long it's been waiting for any PL SQL or Java APIs and stuff like that. So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff you can do from this. You can just look at activity, you can look at metrics, you can group them by plan lines, and you can see which part of the plan executes and which one takes more CPU, as well as you can see your metrics corresponding to this particular thing. Very, very simple reports for doing real-time SQL monitoring. Pretty cool. Same thing for buffer cache stats. Anyways, I have a bunch of screens. I'm not going to go through all these screens, but I've put them there so that you can actually take a look at them. You also have Ash analytics. Obviously, I'm not going to cover what's Ash because I'm assuming everybody knows this. But for any session, you can actually view Ash data by multiple dimensions. So in this case, it's 2 dimensions. I can switch this to advanced and I can switch the number of dimensions. I can change the sample sizes. So in this case, I'm looking at average active sessions by wait class, by wait event, and then I'm looking down at SQL ID. So there are 3 different levels at which I'm looking at. So I can look at the ones that are affecting the most, which SQLs correspond to that. And when I click on the SQLs, I can go into SQL monitoring, which was one of the previous tips. So it's pretty cool. There are multiple levels. There's good graphical visualization, and within a couple of seconds. And of course, there's a whole bunch of options where I can just keep switching around, and I can look at things by top dimensions, PL SQL, resource consumption, weights, and all that sort of stuff. So you can also view workload metrics. Okay, you can monitor workloads in your database and help identify the spikes. This will tell you how the workload distribution actually happens across your database. Pretty cool. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I know people want Apex, and Apex is available. You can do a whole bunch of stuff with it. You can develop all these apps, and there's complete sessions on why you should go to Apex. As a matter of fact, I think 20.2 was the latest version of Apex that was just announced and released. And if you don't like to maintain your own Apex instance and set up your own database and manage and monitor all of this stuff, it's available as part of the autonomous database, and you can access and use this. So a lot of people don't know this, but it's available as part of this. And of course, it's very good for team development. And there's a whole bunch of sessions on Apex last week, as well as I think this week, that will be a good one to attend. All right, next tip. We're going to go to machine learning notebooks. In machine learning notebooks, there's basically Zeppelin notebooks. So there's 2 different kinds of machine learning notebooks. There's Zeppelin notebooks and there's Jupyter notebooks, but these are Zeppelin notebooks. They're kind of functionally identical. They allow you to not just write queries, but they allow you to visualize the output. You can run things when you're done. You can see the outputs in tabular formats. You can switch to graph icons. So this is not just for writing machine learning stuff, but it's a good visualization tool. When you're running things and you want to visualize your data, slice and dice and clean up your data before you actually add any machine learning elements to it. It's pretty cool, as well as running SQL statements and stuff like that. So these are SQL scratchpads, and you can save these scratchpads as a new notebook. You can share them among users. There's a whole collaborative environment that's available as part of the OML workspace. Auto scaling, number 16. By default, if you don't know how much you need, you can set up this thing called auto scaling. Whenever there is a need for additional CPU, you can actually auto scale up to 3x compared to what you need. And once you're not using it, the auto scaling mechanism will slowly decommission those CPUs for you. It doesn't change any concurrency and parallelism settings for the predefined services. Please note that. And the whole goal is to basically spike burst up to manage your peak traffic load. And if you have no idea what your peak traffic load is, it's always a good idea to turn this thing on. So as the workload increases, it adds more cores. As your workload decreases, it reduces the cores. And you get charged only based on how much you use. In data warehouses, month-end stuff, machine learning models, increase in concurrent users, sales reports that have to be done for any kind of weekend trading, or any ad hoc stuff. Somebody comes and runs an ad hoc report, the financial person needs, the CFO needs a tax report that needs to be completed, So those are the kind of use cases. For transaction processing, again, if you want to use machine learning apps without actually impacting other users or any kind of month-end transactions. OLTP, usually you don't need that much amount of bursting unless you have an overall increase in the total number of transactions that you have. Generally, I've seen people kind of scope and specialize this thing, and they set it up in a way that they don't need to burst. But just in case you do need to burst for your transactions, that capability is available. So one click, and that's it. This is something that a lot of DBAs have wanted. You need to download, they want to download the AWR reports. They want to analyze it on their machines. They don't like all this performance hub stuff that's actually there. It's a great amount of stuff that you can do, but I don't like all this mumbo jumbo. I'm the guy who looks at AWR reports and scans all these numbers, and I can look at a report and know exactly what the heck is going on. I could download these reports once I specify a range of snapshots under the perf hub. This is an option. If you want to load data, DBMS Cloud is the mechanism. Now, we've already gone through this before, but I just wanted to specify. So this is how you create your credentials, right? You specify your credentials, you specify the username, password. 3 different methods, username, password. You can specify your auth credentials, or you can specify the OCI key credentials. There are different methods to connect to this. There are a couple of different ways to load your data, but the method is DBMS Cloud copy data. The first one is I'm loading a text file, and which has got delimiters by delimiters a question of semicolons or say colons. And the next one is I'm uploading export dumps. So remember this, the only thing that's changing here is the file type. This is a text file, and here this one is a dump file. I specify here that this is a data pump type file. And then the next one here is I'm specifying a JSON file. And basically the record delimiter is /n, which is basically new line characters. This one is also a JSON file, except this one is a more complex file because it contains arrays. I could specify the record delimiter as 0x01, and I do an unpack arrays option. It basically unpacks each and every array inside this JSON and stores them as individual rows. As you notice, the same syntax pointing to a file in the object store, and the when I'm specifying the JSON object thing, I can just specify the record delimiter, whether I need to unpack the arrays, or whether it is an export dump, or whether it is a text file with a comma delimiter. So you notice how easy it is. The same method I can use to upload any kind of file. I just have to flip 1 or 2 options as specifying in the format. I can also finish the load, and I can query from user load operations to see if something successfully completed, it did not complete, as well as if it did not complete, what was the failure. I can look at the bad file for the records that got rejected. ADB also supports SQL access to your tenancy details. A lot of people are like, when you log a support ticket, it's like, okay, what's your tenancy, right? So I can just do select cloud identity from $PDBS. It will generate this, and you can use this when you file a service request. It gives all the information for this tenancy, and the support engineer can instantly zero down on anything that you are asking a question for as part of the service request. Last one, autonomous Dataguard for ADB. It's Dataguard, it's replicated, it's got a capability you're doing zero data loss. You can switch over and fail over manually, and it's available on 19C or higher databases. And it's basically one click. Cross-region will be available soon. And you can see here the autonomous Dataguard option is disabled. Once you go ahead and enable it, it'll start updating. The primary is down. Obviously, the no data loss has to be guaranteed. So it's updating, and it's disabled when the primary is in transition. Once it's available, then you have the option to either switch over or fail over. In this case, it's completely recovered, so you have an option to switch over. And you also have the option to fail over when you choose to, accept potential data loss when you want to just fail over from your primary instance. All right, that's all I had, guys. 20 quick tips for the autonomous database from all the sessions and labs that we have run. And I hope this is useful. All right, let me switch to seeing if there's anything. Is there anything in Q&A, or have I lambasted the audience?
I have to admit, like Sandesh, like I'm sitting there going, I don't know about the rest of the attendees, but my head has just exploded.
Uh-oh.
But if anyone else on the call is experiencing a similar brain explosion to me, one of the things I will do is we've recently announced this thing called Oracle Live Labs. And if all the really cool things you've just seen from Sandesh inspiring you to go and play some more, this new website is fantastic. It lets you pretty much go through a whole swag of all the things that Sandesh spoke about today. It's all free. You set up live things, and basically there's workshops. It's literally like the ultimate in free education resources for anything to do with Oracle Cloud. So it's very, very cool.
Sweet.
And just one last thing, as Sandesh has said, make sure you jump on and register for some of the other schedules. If this was all just like mind-blowing for you and you want to go through it at a mere mortal pace, the recording will be available for the following 2 weeks. So you can go and check out Sandesh's recording, plus all the other sessions as well. With that, thank you so much for your time, Sandesh. It's always great to see you.
Thank you.
And thank you for everyone else who's attended today. Don't forget to register for the other sessions, and obviously enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks for now, everyone, and we'll see you on the next session. Thanks, Sandesh.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Connor. Appreciate it. And you guys have a good conference. Thank you.